Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. The first item of business is general questions. At question number 1, I call Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what evidence it received in relation to the decision to allow the continued use of electro-fishing for razor clams beyond 2025, when the trial that was started in February 2018 was due to end.
Cabinet Secretary Marie Goujon.
The razor clam scientific trial has yielded promising results that point to the potential for a sustainable commercial fishery with appropriate management measures in place. Now, a progress report was published in 2024 that presents these findings in detail, including completed stock assessments for 2 locations, the Firth of Clyde and Firth of Forth trial areas. The trial was extended for a further 2 years to gather data, to update these stock assessments and enable completion of assessments for additional areas, giving us confidence that fishing for razor clams with this technique can be achieved sustainably across Scotland's seas.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. This 7-year pseudo-scientific inconclusive experiment, which the Government said will now end in 2027, seems to be more about protecting a commercial fishery worth more than £5.5 million to just over 20 boats. The Minister knows that electro-fishing for spoots is banned in the EU. Surely then, in 2027, the Scottish Government, under the Continuity Act, will need to keep pace with the EU and either have to ban electro-fishing of spoots, or will they continue to the farce of a scientific experiment?
Cabinet Secretary.
As with many other areas when it comes to our fisheries, we actually like to lead by example, and I think an example of that work is in relation to the rollout of our remote electronic monitoring. But I do think it's really important. We have to consider the issues about why we had this trial in the first place, about the type of fishing that we were attempting to stop, and we want to make sure that this is sustainable. And it's important that we gather all the evidence for that, which is why this trial was initiated in the first place, and why it has been extended to ensure that we have as robust an evidence base as possible for any future considerations.
Brief supplementary, Alistair Allen.
Can the Minister give an indication of the importance which the Scottish Government places on further developing a razor fishery in future, specifically in areas such as the Western Isles?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think I would just want to assure the member that we do put a great deal of importance when it comes to supporting our fishers in rural and island locations. And again, as I've outlined in relation to the trial that we've undertaken on razor clams, it was extended to ensure that we have that really strong evidence base that a sustainable and economically viable fishery for razor clams is possible in many areas around Scotland, and that includes in the Western Isles too. Now, I'm really keen, as I know other other members would be to see the trial culminate in a commercial fishery if the evidence supports that. The science and regulatory background to this is very complex, but it is really important that we arrive at the right decision using the best available knowledge.
Question number 2, Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support it is providing to help deliver regeneration in the South West, including any plans for future infrastructure and housing investment.
Deputy First Minister.
We're delivering regeneration across the South West of Scotland region through our place-based regeneration programmes. That includes over £27.6 million through the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund. We'll publish a new infrastructure delivery pipeline alongside the budget, the Scottish Spending Review and the draft infrastructure strategy early next year. This financial year, we've made available over £34 million in the South West to support the delivery of the affordable housing priorities of local authorities, and we've also committed up to £4.9 billion in housing investment across Scotland over the next 4 years.
Emma Harper.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer. As the Deputy First Minister will know, communities across Stranraer and Wigtonshire are working and have worked incredibly hard to regenerate and renew the area following the withdrawal of ferries from the town in November 2011. So could the Deputy First Minister advise what funding the Scottish Government has provided over recent years to help that regeneration and boost the economy directly in Stranraer?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, £16 million is earmarked for Stranraer Marina through the Borderlands Growth Deal, and Stranraer and Wigton will benefit from a share of £20 million in the Deals Place programme to stimulate the reinvigoration of the town. Over 700,000 capital funding this year is helping deliver priorities in the local place plan, building on £2.7 million provided for town centre regeneration and the Millennium Centre. A further £500,000 is enabling capacity building and supported delivery of the place plan. And officials met Dumfries and Galloway Council and the local community last week to learn more about regeneration plans for the town.
Supplementary, Finlay Carson.
I'm sure that the Deputy First Minister is very aware of my decade-long lobbying and campaigning for much-needed investment in the A75 and 77, but sadly lacking from the SNP. However, given the importance of all forms of connectivity to economic regeneration, I wanted to highlight the railway line into Stranraer and moves to develop the waterfront. I've been working with various parties for the last 9 years to move and upgrade the railway station. So what consideration is the Scottish Government given to improving rail links to Stranraer, and how might this support wider efforts to revitalise the South West?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I mentioned in my comments that the Scottish Government intend to publish a new infrastructure delivery plan alongside the budget. Obviously, in terms of the sequencing, it's very important that plans that are included in the infrastructure delivery pipeline can be delivered with the capital budget available. So all of us are watching very carefully to see what the Chancellor will outline at the end of this month, because that will heavily inform the budget that my colleague Fiona Robinson can present and the infrastructure and transport plans that my colleague Fiona Hislop can also support.
Question number 3, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Economy Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding the impact on Glasgow's economy and the wider regional economy on the absence of a rail link from Glasgow Airport to the city centre.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, transport is key to our economic prosperity, and the Glasgow Connectivity Commission and the second Strategic Transport Projects Review both identified Clyde Metro as a transformational regional project, which we agree with. Development of the Metro, which could include a link to the airport, is led by the Strathclyde Partnership for Transport, supported by Glasgow City Council and Transport Scotland. And through the Glasgow City Region deal, we are providing £6.1 million towards the case for investment for Clyde Metro, which is anticipated to be completed early in 2027, and that will provide a clear route forward for the project.
Pauline McNeill.
I'm sure the Deputy First Minister agrees that a rail link from Glasgow City Centre to Glasgow Airport is not just about getting travellers to the airport, but it's also about getting workers, particularly 5,000 workers in advanced manufacturing in that district. Another bus service, I'm sure she'll agree, will not cut it. The M8 cannot cope as it is. A rail link to the airport must be in the first phase of the Clyde Metro, and that is the position of SBT and Glasgow City Council. I just want to get this confirmed that it is the position of Transport Scotland, and what financial commitment will the Government make, not just on the planning of it, but the delivery of this project?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, can I just say unequivocally that I agree with Pauline McNeill's analysis that the link will not just be about visitors, but also about workers and many others. It's a transformational project that will address a gap in public transport provision in the region, allowing more effective transport links. And that is precisely why the Scottish Government has made the investment that I outlined in my first answer in terms of the £6.1 million. I think it's important that the process here is that we have a clear route forward for the project and that we pick up at that point in terms of how we all key partners led by SPT, how we continue to support the delivery of that project.
Question number 4, Gordon MacDonald.
Scottish Government what impact its transport policies are having on people in the Edinburgh Pentlands constituency.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
Public transport within the Edinburgh Pentlands constituency is primarily delivered by Lothian buses. In October alone, over 240,000 card holders in Edinburgh made 3.6 million free bus journeys through the young persons and the older disabled persons schemes. Residents and visitors also benefit from local active and sustainable travel infrastructure developments and behaviour change projects, with Transport Scotland's investment through the Active Travel Infrastructure Fund, the People and Place programme and the Bus Infrastructure Fund. And the Scottish Government has also committed £20 million as part of the Edinburgh and South East Region City deal to improve public transport infrastructure in West Edinburgh.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The UK Labour Government has recently ruled out introducing free bus travel for under-22s in England and Wales. Plus, older people are not entitled to free bus travel until they reach 66, unlike in Scotland where entitlement begins at 60. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that the SNP Government travel policies are designed to help reduce barriers related to age, disability, income and geography, enabling better access to education, employment, healthcare, social activities and essential services?
Cabinet Secretary.
I absolutely agree, and the member is correct to identify all the different benefits that free bus travel can bring, but he is also correct to point out that it is the free bus pass for under-22s is only available here in Scotland under this SNP government, and the older people have to wait another 6 years to receive the bus pass, and they can receive the bus pass 6 years earlier here in Scotland. So that's another example. When household bills are increasing, it's the SNP government that are providing support for older people, for younger people and families, and all the other benefits that he set out.
Question number 5, Annabel Ewing. Can I have Ms Ewing's microphone?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it has made an assessment of the potential economic benefits of the reinstatement of an international ferry route from Rosyth.
Minister Jim Fairley.
Very much, Presiding Officer. And I'd just like to point out the tenacity with which Annabel Ewing has pursued this policy, and just to tell her that the Scottish Government is quite clear that a direct trade route between Scotland and Europe could have real economic and social benefits, which is why I have instructed my officials to consult on legislation that will enable the reintroduction of a ferry route between Rosyth and Dunkirk. I met with the project sponsors of the ferry service proposal last week to confirm that a short consultation will be launched as soon as possible, with the Scottish statutory instrument planned to be laid early next year. The changes will increase access to the EU market for Scottish exports, which have been negatively impacted by Brexit, which we didn't vote for, by allowing the flexibility on the location requirements for a border control post. We will do all we can to ensure this direct freight and passenger ferry service to Europe is delivered as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and as constituency MSP for Rosyth Town, and having indeed pursued this issue, it is fair to say, along with others on a cross-party basis for some years now, I very much welcome the Scottish Government now taking the lead on the removal of the Brexit obstacles to the re-establishment of an international passenger and freight ferry route from Rosyth. But of course, time is of the essence here, Minister. So, in that regard, could the Minister confirm when the consultation on the draft regulations will be commenced and how long that consultation will last, and when exactly will the regulations be laid in the new year? And could the Minister also advise as to whether the UK Government has confirmed a timetable for its dealing with the reserve components of the border control obstacles that still remain outstanding? Minister.
Well, I'm pleased that the work on the consultation has already begun and it is proceeding at pace. So a short consultation will be launched as soon as possible, with time for an SSI to be laid before the Scottish Parliament is dissolved prior to the elections in 2026. The Deputy First Minister has also sought confirmation from the UK Government their willingness to address at pace the components of the effective border control which remain reserved, and I will instruct my officials to share further details with Ms Ewing as soon as possible.
Brief supplementary, Richard Leonard.
Can I refer members to my register of interest as the convener of the RMT Scottish Parliamentary Group? I welcome the Government's consideration of this proposal, which would benefit our international links. However, in its consideration of this proposal, can the Minister give an assurance that any operator would have to follow the Fair Work principles, recognise trade unions, and that we will not see the blatant negation of workers' rights we witnessed at P&O Ferries, who sacked and replaced 800 seafarers by video message?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Government will continue to communicate with potential operators in Scotland to the main ports and to explore the opportunities for all new commercial ferry services so that Scottish exporters and passengers have more direct routes to and from Europe, and all those considerations will be put in place.
Question number 6, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it has plans to increase income tax in the forthcoming Scottish budget.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
We will, as is the normal course for any budget, outline our income tax policy for 2026-27 in the Scottish budget on the 13th of January 2026.
Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let's be clear, the SNP has broken its manifesto pledge on income tax and has repeatedly misled this Parliament about how many Scots may pay more tax than they would in the rest of the UK. Today's Audit Scotland report shows that more than £1 billion of projected income tax gains from previous tax rises have simply not materialised. And if the SNP raises tax again in January, it will only deepen the fiscal doom loop that this government is presiding over. So will the Cabinet Secretary now listen to the Scottish Conservatives and engage a zero-based budgeting approach to identify the savings required to restore sustainability to Scotland's public finances?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I repeat, as the Scottish Fiscal Commission have said, that a majority of taxpayers pay less than they would elsewhere in the UK. The Audit Scotland report, of course, we will look at, but our income tax policy, of course, has meant that there's more money for households, protecting investment in our public services, and the social contract all would be put at risk by the Tories' unfunded tax policies. But on the day where we have the two top global credit rating agencies giving Scotland the highest feasible credit rating it could achieve, citing our credit strengths as the nation, such as, well, Craig Hoy might not want to hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. If we take Standard and Poor's,
let's hear one another.
Standard and Poor's have said Scotland's economy is strong with high GDP per capita in an international comparison. Governance has a positive impact on the rating, stemming from good budgeting practices, a supportive institutional framework and a good fiscal track record. I know who the public will believe, Presiding Officer. It won't be Craig Hoy, it will be the credit rating agencies, and that is, of course, showing the underlying strength of the Scottish economy and our fiscal management.
Question number 7, Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will request that the Auditor-General conducts an investigation into the ScotWind offshore wind leasing round in light of the finding in the Future Economy Scotland report, Rethinking ScotWind, Maximising Scotland's Offshore Wind Potential, that on a per megawatt basis, a comparable leasing round in England and Wales is projected to raise up to 40 times more than the £755 million raised in one-off fees in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The ScotWind leasing round developed by Crown Estate Scotland was informed by a 2021 review based on expert independent advice to ensure long-term value. It's important to take a holistic view of all the economic value that can be derived from ScotWind, not simply initial option fee payments. For example, ScotWind developers have committed to invest an average of £1.5 billion per project in Scotland, which is expected to deliver jobs and significant economic benefits. I note that the member has written to the Auditor-General asking for an investigation. Scottish Government officials do discuss future audit programmes with Audit Scotland, but ultimately any decision will be for the Auditor-General.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary didn't answer the simple question and does seem to take complacency to new Olympian heights. But this report found that we've lost a sum of between 15 and 30 billion pounds. Now, that's between 2 and 4 times the whole of the capital budget of the Scottish Government in 1 year. So, surely, Cabinet Secretary, there has to be an investigation into why there was an auction with a cap. Isn't the purpose of an auction to get the best price? Whose advice was that? And how on earth did they not get advice about comparable value figures which were available just south of the border?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm sure Mr Ewing knows this, but the English and Welsh Round 4 leasing round is not comparable to ScotWind. It comprised fixed-bottom developments in shallower waters, in contrast to the ScotWind programme, which comprises a majority of projects using floating technology further offshore in more challenging conditions, therefore requiring a higher cost base for projects to be constructed. Reviews, as I've already confirmed, have been based on expert, independent advice. If Mr Ewing has any suggestions about those, I'll be happy to pass them on to the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. Taylor was a vulnerable child in local authority care in Glasgow, and she should have been protected, but she was preyed upon by grooming gangs. Last night, she wrote to John Swinney, telling him that she and her friends were plied with alcohol and drugs and sexually abused by at least 10 Pakistani men. Taylor and other victims say there must be a grooming gangs inquiry in Scotland. They say it's the only way to uncover the scale of the abuse, establish why it went unchecked and ensure that it cannot continue. So will John Swinney agree to the inquiry being asked for by Taylor and other victims?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, first of all, I want to confirm to Russell Finlay that I have received the letter from Taylor, and I want to express here to Parliament my admiration for her courage to speak out on such an important and very difficult subject. And I am deeply saddened to hear of any cases of sexual abuse, and as Parliament knows, I have taken significant action during my term in office as a Minister to ensure this issue has been addressed. The Government is undertaking work already through the work of the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, which is looking at previous inquiries, evidence and practices to establish what further actions and recommendations are required. And Police Scotland is actively reviewing current and historical child abuse investigations to determine what issues need to be addressed in any potential inquiry. The Government has remained open to the question of a grooming gangs inquiry, but there is a series of steps being taken to explore these issues at the present moment. And the last point I would make is that it is absolutely vital that where there is any accusation of criminal conduct that is drawn to the attention of the police, and Police Scotland have a duty to address those inquiries and to address those complaints.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you. Taylor's social work files allegedly show that Police Scotland failed to investigate. She said, and I quote, "It made me feel sick to my stomach. It's like they didn't even bother to ask any questions. And that's the bit that gets me the most, because it could have been stopped and it never was." Another grooming gang victim, Fiona Goddard, was trafficked from England to Glasgow and raped by groups of men. She says that as far back as 2014, police in West Yorkshire were, quote, well aware of links to Scotland, but clearly no one bothered to investigate further. Victims don't trust what happened to them will be fully investigated by organisations they believe turned a blind eye or even engaged in cover-up. Has John Swinney spoken with Police Scotland about these new allegations? And does he believe that the actions of the authorities should be independently examined?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, in relation to the case of Taylor, I understand from comments that have been made by Police Scotland that the police have set out, and I'll read to Parliament the comment from Police Scotland. A complaint about the police was received in September 2025. The complainer was spoken to, and we confirmed information had been passed to us. But since no report was made to police in reference to any crime, this complaint did not fit the criteria as a complaint about the police. The complainer was advised she should make a report to police if she had been a victim of a crime. The complainer confirmed she was happy to have the complaint closed with this advice. Now, I put that on the record simply to say that it is absolutely vital in any circumstance where anybody believes they have been the victim of a sexual crime that they come forward to the police and make that complaint. And I would, and certainly my view, my expectation as First Minister would be that that would be taken deadly seriously by the police and investigated. Now, in relation to the question of trust about how these matters are handled, we've seen examples where there have been extensive prosecutions for sexual conduct and sexual misconduct in Scotland, sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. There have been a whole range of prosecutions taken forward successfully by the police, obviously taken forward by the Crown, which are determined to address the very serious issues that Mr Finlay puts to me. And I hope that gives victims of these crimes confidence that if they come forward, their concerns will be properly and fully investigated by Police Scotland, which would be my expectation as First Minister.
Russell Finlay.
I think that any attempt to shift the blame onto victims for how and when these are reported is highly questionable. Taylor was a child. These crimes were known about at the time by the authorities on the basis of the social work reports. And of course, grooming gangs are not confined to any one community. Earlier this year, a group of white men and women were jailed for the horrific abuse of children in Glasgow. Last month, a Romanian gang was convicted of abusing 10 young women in Dundee. This is not a historic problem. It is happening today. Reports of online child sexual abuse made to Police Scotland have more than doubled in the past year alone. So how can John Swinney hope to stop child abuse now, when he won't support a full and fearless investigation into the industrial-scale abuse of recent years?
First Minister.
The first thing I want to say is that nothing that I am saying is about shifting the blame. And I say that respectfully to Parliament, but I'm simply putting on the record factual information that's been provided to me by Police Scotland. Now, in relation to the question of... my parliamentary record demonstrates that I am prepared to ensure that significant efforts are made to address abusive conduct in our society. The Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry was sponsored under my leadership as Education Secretary and Deputy First Minister for many years, and it does vital work in making sure that the voices of victims are heard loud and clear in our society. Now, on the question of online child abuse, I was clear in an answer to Martin Whitfield last week in Parliament that I want to make sure every single step we can take as a government and our authorities in Scotland is directed towards tackling online child abuse. Indeed, the efforts that have been put in place by Police Scotland under the auspices of the Gartcosh Crime Campus are lauded around the world as an example of integrated proceedings involving multiple agencies to ensure that organised crime networks in Scotland are shattered as a consequence of our efforts. So I assure Mr Finlay of our determination to do all of that activity, but also to work collaboratively, as I said to Mr Whitfield last week, to ensure that there is a legislative approach in place in the United Kingdom, which is using the powers of the United Kingdom, which don't exist for this Parliament, to tackle the culture of online abuse, which is attacking the very fabric of childhood in Scotland today as a consequence of the lawlessness that has been perpetrated by online agencies.
Russell Finlay.
Talks about his parliamentary record. Well, that also shows that he voted against my party's attempts to instigate a grooming gang inquiry in Scotland just a matter of weeks ago. And in a previous answer, he cited the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, saying that they are looking at these issues. However, victims like Taylor are concerned because the same authorities who failed them sit on this government group, and they fear that it's little more than another SNP talking shop. In July, the group discussed Baroness Casey's report into grooming gangs elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And the minutes of this meeting state, and I quote, "There is no current evidence that the issues identified in Casey are presenting in the same way in Scotland." Now, in light of the available evidence, Presiding Officer, that claim is patently untrue. Does John Swinney agree that grooming gangs are a problem in Scotland and not just elsewhere?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Finlay is not setting out properly the effect of the amendment that his colleague Liam Kerr put forward during the course of the Victims and Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill. Because all that amendment would have required was a Victims and Witnesses Commissioner, who has as yet not been appointed, to undertake a report which would consider whether or not there was any further action required in this respect. So this is not something that could happen today. It would have to wait for the Victims and Witnesses Commissioner to be appointed and for that individual to then consider whether there is any appropriate action. So it's just completely and utterly a distortion to say that there was a groomings inquiry proposal in front of Parliament that was not supported. Now, the reason why I cited the action that I cited at the beginning is that it's action that's happening today. The National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group are looking at these questions. Police Scotland is actively reviewing current and historical abuse investigations. So that is happening today in Scotland under the direction of this Scottish Government. We will consider its findings. I reiterate that we remain open to the question of an inquiry on grooming gangs, but what I am satisfied about is that the police will address these issues and that our judicial system will address them too, and we will reflect on whether there is any further scrutiny that's required in the light of those investigations.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Later today we'll hear from the Health Secretary about the Government's so-called NHS Winter Preparedness Plan. But we have these announcements every year and the crisis continues. Take the example of delayed discharge. This time last year, I called for action over the almost 2,000 hospital beds a day that are being lost because patients couldn't be discharged. This year, that number is almost exactly the same. Last year, the Health Secretary admitted the crisis in our NHS isn't just for Christmas, it's all year round. So why are we facing another winter unprepared? Why has another year gone and the SNP have wasted it? Why do Scots continue to suffer because of John Swinney and his SNP government's incompetence?
First Minister.
President, so over the course of the last year, the Government has been focused on doing a number of things to reduce pressure in our NHS system. That's why we're now seeing long waits coming down. It's why we're seeing waiting lists coming down. Now, the issue that Mr Sarwar raises, of course, is about the flow of patients through our health and social care system. And I accept that the issue of flow through the system is the critical issue here. That's why every NHS board now has frailty services in A&E departments, which will help particularly with older and more vulnerable patients where the average length of stay is being reduced as a consequence of the intervention of the frailty services. So that's one thing that's changed materially, along with the efforts to reduce pressure on the health service through the reduction in waiting lists, to ensure that we have the adequate measures in place. And of course, other interventions such as hospital at home and the support that's been put in place through the strong local government settlement that we gave this year to strengthen health and social care partnerships to make sure more and more people can be supported at home rather than in our hospitals.
The level of delayed discharge is almost exactly the same as last year, demonstrating no progress. Every year they have a new plan, and every year things get worse. Let's look at two other measures, A&E and cancelled operations. Last winter, over 90,000 patients waited over 4 hours in A&E. That's well over 4,000 higher than the winter before. But A&E performance leading into this winter is worse than last year. Let's look at operations. Last winter, almost 4,500 operations were cancelled. But in the months leading into winter this year, there have already been 8,640 cancelled operations. That's almost 600 more in the months leading into winter than last year. Every year the SNP has a new plan, and every year things get even worse. John Swinney was supposed to be the guy that steadied the ship and made things better. But it's obvious to everyone that he's failed, hasn't he?
First Minister.
I don't think this is a great week for Mr Sarwar to talk to me about steadying the ship when I look at the chaos of the Labour government in London. Let me reassure Mr Sarwar with the fact that in the last 12 months there has been an increase in the operations performed in Scotland, and in September of this year there was an even higher increase in the number of operations carried out. So the throughput, the activity levels in the health service are increasing, which is why we are making headway on reducing the waiting lists and the waiting times that people are experiencing. Now, of course, there are enormous pressures on A&E, and one of the issues, I was briefed about it on Tuesday by the Chief Medical Officer, is that the expectation is that the flu season will be particularly challenging for us this winter, which is to do with the prevailing strain of flu that is emerging. So there is going to be pressure on our emergency services, which are about the pressures that are coming because of wider health considerations. But what I can assure Mr Sarwar about is that the government's efforts to, for example, increase the number of GPs so we've got more access to healthcare, expand the number of frailty units, to reduce the waiting lists and waiting times, are all focused on ensuring our health service can meet the needs of the people of Scotland.
Anna Sarwar.
Officer, the truth is that every part of our NHS is now at breaking point, and all because of this SNP government. Let's look at John Swinney's record. On his watch, the NHS is now in permanent crisis. Hundreds more operations cancelled this year than last year. Thousands more patients facing unacceptable A&E waits. Ambulances waiting hours outside of A&E. Thousands forced to remortgage homes or borrow from family to go private. Hundreds of thousands waiting in pain and anxiety on NHS waiting lists. Put simply, our NHS is not safe in John Swinney's hands. This isn't a winter crisis, it's an SNP crisis, and it's putting lives at risk. So doesn't this disastrous record show that we must make this winter the last that the SNP are in charge of our NHS?
First Minister.
As I set out to Parliament, a whole series of examples of progress have been made in the National Health Service, not least that new outpatient waits have fallen for 4 consecutive months, waits longer than a year. The total waiting list for outpatients and inpatients and day case lists have decreased, so progress has been made in that respect. Activity in the National Health Service has increased, with extra appointments being available in a whole range of different disciplines. Operation numbers are up. The improvements in relation to the record number of hip and knee operations have been delivered as a consequence of interventions that I have made. And in preparation for winter, we have frailty services in A&E departments, the length and breadth of the country, to make sure that the needs of people are being met. So I've focused, since I became First Minister, on ensuring that I strengthen the National Health Service to ensure it meets the needs of the people of Scotland. And I think if anybody is looking around just now, wondering what the prospect of a Labour government might be like in Scotland after the elections in May, they will see the very, very disappointing spectacle of the United Kingdom Labour government. Look at the behaviour and the performance of the UK government in the last 15 months. A cut to winter fuel payments.
Hear one another.
A cut to winter fuel payments for pensioners. No action on the two-child limit, and the chaos of the last few days, where the Prime Minister's team are briefing against his Health Secretary, where the Labour Party are fighting amongst themselves. Well, what the people of Scotland can rely on is having a First Minister and me that fights for the people of Scotland. I'll leave the fighting amongst themselves to the Labour Party and their failed UK government.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I declare an interest in that my wife is a primary school teacher and a member of the EIS? Presiding Officer, when John Swinney was Education Secretary, the SNP made a manifesto commitment to cut teachers' class contact time. An hour and a half less each week in front of class, so more time to do lesson prep, to do marking, and all the other things that teaching involves. That is what the SNP promised they'd deliver. Now, nearly 5 years on, that's not happened, and teachers are so angry about it that they could strike by the end of January. So can I ask the First Minister, why has he not delivered on the SNP's manifesto commitment to our teachers?
First Minister.
This is an important issue, and I'm determined to make progress on it. When we negotiated our budget agreement with local authorities last year, one of the provisions in it was to make progress on exactly this issue. There were obviously a number of other commitments in the agreement that was reached with local authorities, a number of obligations on the government in relation to financial support for local authorities, in relation to there being no restrictions on the council tax, and a variety of other issues. Every single one of the commitments made by the government has been honoured and fulfilled, but we await progress with local authorities on class contact time. Now, I've made it very clear to the President of COSLA that I am not prepared to tolerate a situation where we move at the pace of the slowest local authority, which is what the government is being presented with just now. So I will have the opportunity to discuss this issue when I address the COSLA annual conference later on today in St Andrews. But it's an important issue on which I want to make progress, because I don't want to see education disrupted by industrial action, and I don't believe there's a need for that, because we could be making progress on this issue, because there are sufficient teachers in the system to reduce class contact time in the way that Mr Cole-Hamilton puts to me, but it needs progress from our local authority partners, and the government will be insisting upon that.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I have to say, Presiding Officer, I think it's a pretty pathetic excuse for the First Minister to pin this on councils when so many of those same councils are run by his party. Let's just get all that straight. So the SNP government is blaming SNP councils for stopping the SNP from keeping SNP election promises. With that kind of contortion, Presiding Officer, the First Minister must be attending some kind of secret yoga classes. Presiding Officer, teachers don't want to strike. They just want this government to keep its promises. Strike action a couple of years ago caused pupils to miss up to a dozen days of school. It caused havoc for working parents. So will the First Minister give families a cast-iron guarantee today that there will be no strikes in the new year?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Cole-Hamilton raises with me the logistics of how these changes are made. I cannot instruct Scottish councils to reduce class contact time. I need to do it by agreement, because the Education Scotland Act 1980 gives operational responsibility for the running of our schools to councils. Now, Mr Cole-Hamilton is at the front of the queue, normally demanding that I respect local authorities and local decision-making, and here I'm doing exactly that. But the point I'm simply making to Parliament is that the Government reached an agreement with local authorities about reducing class contact time. I've kept my side of the bargain. I want local authorities to keep their side of the bargain, which is about reducing class contact time, because I don't want there to be any disruption to education. We've just managed to negotiate a pay deal with teachers, which has been accepted by teachers, so there will be no disruption because of pay as a consequence of this negotiation by the Scottish Government and by local authorities. And I want to make progress on class contact time. And that's exactly what the Education Secretary and I are focused on doing.
Question number 4, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the report on regional economic growth by former University of Glasgow Principal Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, all contributions by Professor Muscatelli are worthy of consideration, and the Scottish Government will do so. On the main topic of regional economic structures, we are already committed to increasing regional empowerment and will provide further information on our plans in the coming weeks. We also note that Professor Muscatelli identifies the requirement for a supportive immigration policy to contribute to economic growth and the need for the Scottish Government to influence the UK Government's broken system. We need an immigration system that supports Scotland's distinct demographic needs, and I would once again urge the United Kingdom Government to finally recognise that.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the First Minister for his answer. It was Anna Sarwar who said, "Read my lips, no austerity under a Labour government." Now his Westminster bosses threaten to inflict more than £1 billion of cuts to Scotland's budget. These cuts would fly in the face of the economic growth Scotland needs, as outlined by Professor Muscatelli's report. Does the First Minister share my view that this threat proves beyond doubt that decisions on Scotland's finances should be made here in Scotland with a fresh start of independence and not by a Westminster government that fails Scotland at every turn?
First Minister.
Well, Presiding Officer, I agree with Mr Stewart on some of these fundamental points, and many of these points were made by the credit rating agencies, who indicated that we have in this country a strong economy, we have prudent financial policies, budgetary planning with the ability to adjust where necessary in a timely manner, and the fact that our economy is strong with high GDP per capita in an international comparison. That demonstrates that where we are able to exercise self-government, it is successful for Scotland. I want us to be able to exercise more self-government with independence and to pursue the economic opportunities that will be bright for an independent Scotland.
Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Sir Anton Muscatelli's report is damning on the impact of SNP tax rises, so perhaps Anna Sarwar can pass it to Rachel Reeves before she inflicts yet more damage on the Scottish economy. But will the First Minister now stop playing the daft laddie on income tax and concede 2 points? One is that he has broken his manifesto pledge not to freeze income tax. And when we also concede this, that he has repeatedly misled this Parliament, as have his ministers, on how many Scots are now paying more tax than they would if they lived in England.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, we've maintained our manifesto commitments in relation to taxation and on the issues of the tax paid by people in Scotland. The Scottish Fiscal Commission's briefing paper on Tuesday indicated quite clearly that the majority of taxpayers in Scotland are paying less in taxation than if they lived in the rest of the United Kingdom. And that's what I've always said to Parliament, and I'll keep on saying it. Mr Hoy might not like it, but I'm going to keep on saying the things that are the case.
Let's ensure that everyone gathered here can hear what is being said. Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I welcome the interest in this important report from Scotland's leading economist, Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli, commissioned by Scottish Labour. But perhaps let's try a supplementary action on the detail of the report, because it comes out in the same week as an Audit Scotland report identifies that the Scottish Government has £1.1 billion less to spend because earnings are growing less quickly in Scotland as they are in the rest of the United Kingdom. So does he agree with the two observations from both this report and Audit Scotland's, that there's been a failure to identify the substantial economic levers available to the Scottish Government and marshal them, and in particular the detail of the Audit Scotland report that there's been a failure to focus on policies that could grow earnings and wages in Scotland. Because after all, that's not just right for the Scottish economy, that's right for Scottish workers, isn't it?
First Minister.
Well, what I would say to Daniel Johnson, a number of points in what he said to me. In relation to the question of wealth generation, since 2007, under this government, GDP per person in Scotland has grown by 10.2% compared to 6.8% in the United Kingdom, while productivity has grown at an average rate of 0.9% per year compared to the UK average of 0.3%. So that debunks the point that Mr Johnson is putting to me. Of course, there are structural inequalities in the United Kingdom in terms of economic activity and wealth, which the Scottish Government is trying to counter with the limited powers of devolution. We could do more with the powers of independence that would give us more scope to act in this respect. But I think what should be causing much more cheer and optimism in Parliament today is the report of the credit rating agencies, which demonstrates that Scotland has got a large and well-diversified economy that supports tax generation capacity, that we have governance has a positive impact on the rating, stemming from good budgeting practices, a supportive institutional framework and a good fiscal track record. It's pretty obvious that the opposition in this Parliament cannot cope when there's anything good said about Scotland or good said about the performance of the Scottish Government. This is a day for Scotland to be proud of our economic track record.
Question number 5, Rachel Hamilton.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will maintain its manifesto commitment to freeze income tax rates and bans.
First Minister.
President Officer, we will, as in the normal course for any budget, outline our income tax policy for 2026-27 in the Scottish Budget on the 13th of January 2026.
Rachel Hamilton.
I have it here. Presiding Officer, freeze income tax rates and bans and increase thresholds by a maximum of inflation. It says it in their manifesto. But Labour is set to do exactly what John Swinney wants. Rachel Reeves will break her manifesto commitment and raise taxes for hard-working Scots. They will face a £1 billion shortfall, as according to Audit Scotland. John Swinney seems set on breaking his promises too. Can he tell us how much it's going to cost Scottish taxpayers?
First Minister.
Obviously, there's a lot of talk about tax going on just now, and a lot of uncertainty about the United Kingdom Government's position, which may well have implications for us. So the Scottish Government will take its opportunity to consider those issues and set out in an orderly fashion the approach that we're going to take on tax, given the fact that we will have we may well have a different tax landscape to consider, and that's what people in Scotland would expect us to do.
Question number 6, Ariane Burgess.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government is still on track to restore 250,000 hectares of peatland by 2030.
First Minister.
Through our peatland restoration programme, Peatland Action, we've restored around 90,000 hectares to date, including 14,860 hectares in 24-25, and this year we're on track to deliver more than 12,000 hectares. In the draft climate change plan published last week, we included a proposal to expand and extend our programme to restore 400,000 hectares by 2040, reflecting an increase in our ambition. Protecting, managing and restoring degraded peatlands is a vital part of mitigating and adapting to the climate and nature emergencies.
Ariane Burgess.
80% of our peatlands, approximately 1.6 million hectares, are degraded. And this means they're one of our largest single sources of emissions. They can't support nature restoration and nor provide solutions to issues like flooding. It's vital that we urgently step up restoration efforts, and yet in the new draft climate change plan, this government is slowing things down. Increasing restoration by 10% a year is a major deceleration compared to the previous 2030 target. First Minister, why is your government going backwards on this key policy at the same time as pledging to do more for climate and nature?
Through the Chair, always. First Minister.
As I set out in my earlier answer, we are taking a number of steps to extend the commitments on peatland restoration. This is one part of the programme for climate action which has been set out to Parliament, and by the end of this year we will have set out the planning necessary to achieve the 2040 ambitions. I agree with Ariane Burgess about the importance of taking this action to help us in our journey to net zero, and that's exactly the focus of the Government's climate change plan.
Brief supplementary, Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in Midlothian, peat is still being extracted. It's dug up commercially with a licence under the Town and Country Planning Act 1997. And that only requires a 15-year periodic review of those licences for mineral permissions. Can I ask, and this is something I've pursued for some time, given it seems bizarre, even counterproductive, while pledging to restore peat, that legislation still allows peat extraction over 15-year periods? And can I ask once again if the Scottish Government will undertake to review that legislation?
First Minister.
I hope this gives some reassurance to Christine Graham, but in National Planning Framework 4, there is provision that development proposals for new commercial peat extraction, including extensions to existing sites, are not supported except for use in the whisky industry. So we continue to work towards delivering our commitment to ban the sale of horticultural peat, and are currently exploring all legislative options for establishing new restrictions. So I hope that gives Christine Graham some reassurance, but I'd be happy to engage further on that question.
Brief supplementary, Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last year, the 14,860 hectares of peatland accounted for a reduction in carbon emissions of 282,000 tonnes approximately. But the single wildfire at Dover Bridge in July this year accounted for an initial estimate of 590,000 tonnes, more than twice as much as the total from peatland restoration. So, given the aim here is the overall reduction of carbon emissions, Presiding Officer, wouldn't true Greens, like myself, wish to see a little more money spent on tackling wildfires effectively, and perhaps the money could come from the peatland restoration budget?
First Minister.
I don't think there's a sort of an either-or question here that Mr Ewing puts to me, because I don't want to see wildfires happening in Scotland. They are happening because of climate change. So we've got to take action under the long-term action that is required to achieve climate action, to reduce the temperature of the planet. Now, as Parliament knows, I've been in Malawi and Zambia. I've seen at absolutely close quarters the ferocious damage of climate change in these communities, and it's happening here in Scotland. The wildfires are a symptom of this problem. We've had water scarcity problems in Scotland right up until early October in the northeast of Scotland. So we cannot ignore the effects of climate change in our society. We have to take the action, which is why the Government is committed to peatland restoration, and it's why the Government is committed, as Mr Fairley set out in a statement to Parliament, to taking effective collaborative work to tackle the risk of wildfires in our society.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries. Much interest as ever. Concise questions and responses appreciated. I call Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, my constituent Chelsea was diagnosed with MND in 2024. And with her condition now worryingly deteriorating, finds herself in wholly unsuitable accommodation with her husband, who is her full-time carer, and her 4 children. A larger, appropriately adapted property would afford Chelsea and her family a quality of life for the precious time they have remaining together. Despite the best efforts of MND Scotland and representations I have made to various housing providers, the size of the property required has been a stumbling block. And the First Minister, I know a new property for Chelsea and her family is not in your gift. However, in such circumstances, families quite rightly look to all of us for a solution. Can I ask if the First Minister will consider the plight of Chelsea and her family and use his office to see if a solution can be identified to this dreadful situation?
First Minister.
very sorry to hear of the case that Mr Doris brings to my attention on behalf of his constituent Chelsea, and I send Chelsea and her family my very best wishes. One of the important issues here is about the ability to adapt properties to meet the needs of individuals, or potentially to have new build properties constructed, and that can't be done overnight. We have increased the budget for adaptations to £20.9 million, and it was one of the reasons for that was to make sure we had suitable accommodation for cases such as Chelsea's. And if Mr Doris would like to share details with me, I will use whatever endeavours I can in my office to try to resolve the situation. While I'm speaking about M&D issues, may I also pay tribute to Sheriff Alistair Carmichael, who is very courageously a sheriff in Dundee, who is continuing to work as a sheriff with adaptive technology and has shared his case publicly with us all. And I wish to express my admiration to Sheriff Carmichael for the courageous example he sets to us all in the face of the challenges that he is experiencing. He is an example to us all, and I know that Chelsea and her family will be as well.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, the UK Supreme Court issued a judgment in the cases of David Daly and Andrew Keir, which, whilst upholding their convictions, raises very serious issues about the conduct of trials involving sexual offences. Legal experts say this could trigger multiple appeals by those convicted of sexual offences. The courts have a very difficult task of balancing the need to protect complainants, usually women, from intrusive questioning around behaviour, whilst also guaranteeing the accused a fair trial. So how will the Scottish Government respond to this judgment?
First Minister.
President Officer, the judgment from the Supreme Court gives detailed consideration to the complex issues that are involved in the admissibility of evidence in sexual offences trials. It is clear from the judgment that there is no requirement for a change in the law regulating these matters, which is specifically provided for in sections 274 and 275 of the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act 1995. What the Supreme Court did say was that it is for all judges in sexual offences cases to reflect this ruling as they would in any other Supreme Court ruling that was relevant to them in the handling of such cases. So this is therefore a matter for the courts, which, as Mr Fraser will know, operate independently of the government, and I know that the judiciary will be considering the issues that arise as a consequence of the Supreme Court judgment, but there is no requirement for us to change the law in these matters.
Claire Baker. Thank you, Presiding Officer. In addition to the question from Murdo Fraser, the Parliament has recently passed the Victims and Witnesses Act that is looking to make the experience easier for victims and witnesses. So I would ask the First Minister what assurances he can give to women who are now concerned about the risk of appeals and having to go through that process, and what this means, the decision from the Supreme Court, in terms of future evidence in rape and sexual assault cases. First Minister.
In relation to the point that I've made, the substantive point is that there is, in my view, no requirement for there to be a legislative change. This is about court procedures, but Claire Baker's question highlights the important issues in relation to conduct of cases in court, which can have a bearing on the type of questions that are led and the type of evidence that is led, and that can cause enormous distress to victims, who are invariably women in these cases. The Government will consider carefully the implications of the ruling. These will be considered by the Government in the ordinary course of time, but obviously the courts will have to reflect on these issues. But I think it would be deeply regrettable if there was any situation where we have a return to some of the practices in courts that have been deeply distressing to victims of sexual crime, and I want to make sure, and I want to set out today my desire to make sure that that is not the outcome that arises out of the Supreme Court judgment.
Emma Roddick.
New modelling by this SNP government shows that a social tariff on energy bills could lift more than 200,000 Scottish households out of extreme fuel poverty. While the powers to compel energy companies to act remain at Westminster, the Scottish Government must do all that it can to encourage progress, especially as the UK Government has broken its promise to reduce bills by £300. Can the First Minister outline how much households could expect to save under a social tariff, and can he outline what engagement his government is undertaking to make a social tariff a reality for those who need it most, like those in the Highlands and Islands?
First Minister.
So we shared the final report of our social tariff working group with the UK Government in March this year, asking it to act on the recommendations. Our analysis this week shows that if implemented, around 660,000 households in Scotland would see their model bills go down by up to an average of £700 under a targeted bill discount, lifting more than 150,000 households out of fuel poverty. We continue to seek engagement with the UK Government on this work, and our position remains that they must take urgent action to protect households and deliver on its promises, which it has singularly failed to do to date.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Keith Rawlinson died in February 2024 after being brutally attacked while working as a bus driver in Elgin. His killer only received a sentence of 4 years and 4 months, but now his family have been told through the victim notification scheme he could be released as early as next year. Keith's widow has called this disgusting, and Sue Rawlinson has said she feels heartbroken to think that Keith has not had justice, and she also said, "I don't think he should be released early. We've been totally let down." First Minister, Sue Rawlinson's right, isn't she?
First Minister.
I have every sympathy with Mrs Rawlinson in the loss that she has suffered, and I pay tribute to her husband, who should not have experienced what he experienced in the course of his responsibilities. The issues of sentencing, of course, are taken forward independently by the judiciary, and it would be inappropriate for me to question sentences that are set out. And, of course, there are various legislative issues that have to be considered before anyone is released, and those will take their course. But I take this opportunity to express my sympathy to Mrs Rawlinson on the heartbreak that she suffered with the loss of her husband and the anxiety that this issue will be causing to her today.
Rhoda Grant.
Ferry passengers in Lewis have been experiencing incredible disruption due to the MV Isle of Lewis being unable to carry vehicles since last week. This has been particularly difficult and trying for those travelling to hospital and from hospital appointments. It adds over 3 hours' drive to their journey if they can get an alternative booking. All road haulage is also disrupted, and it feels like it's the start of another winter of constant disruption with no end in sight. So can I ask the First Minister what alternatives have been put in place for Lewis? What alternatives will be put in place for Barra when that ferry returns to its normal route at some point, possibly next week? And what steps is he going to take to ensure that islanders are never left in this situation again?
First Minister.
I understand the difficulties that have been experienced. I understand that cars are now able to be taken on the MV Isle of Lewis, which is the ferry operating on the Ullapool to Stornoway route. In addition to that, CalMac have put on additional sailings of the MV Hebrides between Uig and Tarbert, which I accept puts on a longer journey for travellers from Lewis, but it has provided additional capacity on that route. And of course, as we go through the winter maintenance period, we're operating to a winter timetable where there are fewer sailings, but CalMac will be working, and the Transport Secretary is deeply engaged in all these questions to make sure there is effective and sustainable services available to all island communities, and the Government will be actively working to ensure that's the case.
Take 2 further brief supplementaries. Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week saw another example of SNP Scotland and Labour UK being on different trajectories. While unemployment in Scotland continues to fall, in the rest of Britain it's risen to its highest level since the pandemic. And this morning we saw UK growth last quarter at a pitiful 0.1%. Can the First Minister outline the SNP Government's commitment to growing Scotland's economy and supporting people into work, particularly our younger generation?
First Minister.
So that is a key focus of my government, which is to improve economic opportunity. We are now seeing very distinct patterns on unemployment between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. We continue to have substantial success in growing the economy and the attraction of investment. And of course, the credit rating score, which we achieved last night from Moody's and Standard & Poor's, the best rating we could possibly have achieved, a tribute to the strength of the Scottish economy, the strength of the fiscal management of this government, the strength of the institutions that we have at our disposal, is good news for Scotland, and it's a proud day for our country.
And Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 10 years on from Baillie Gwyn's tragic killing in Aberdeen and promises of action from this government, hard-hitting figures show that incidents of pupil violence in Aberdeen schools have quadrupled, whilst across the city the number of crimes recorded within schools is rising year on year. But let members be in no doubt, this is not confined to Aberdeen. For years, this government has promised but failed to stem the violence in our schools. So when will this government start taking real action, such as anti-weapon lessons in classrooms? And finally, stop these horrific incidents?
First Minister.
Well, let me make it clear there is absolutely no place for violence in our schools in any way, shape or form, and the Government's behaviour guidance, which has been constructed in collaboration with local authorities and trade unions, is designed to enable us to address these issues. Many of the techniques that Mr Kerr has talked about education, about violence and the danger of carrying knives, for example, are taken forward in our school system. The Mentors in Violence Reduction Programme, the steps that are taken in relation to the No Knives Better Lives campaign are all shared in our schools, and I want to reinforce the importance the Government attaches to the education on measures of this type to ensure that pupil behaviour does not result in the tragedies like the loss of Baillie Gwyn, which is at the heart of Mr Kerr's question.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Point of order, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I fear that the First Minister may have misled Parliament again today, so I seek your advice on how we can invite the First Minister to correct the record. The SNP manifesto quite clearly committed to freezing income tax rates and bans, but yet in the budget of 2023-2024, both income tax rates and income tax bans rose above inflation. So the First Minister has yet again misled not just this Parliament, but the public who are watching. Can I seek your advice as to how we finally get the truth from the First Minister when he appears in this Parliament?
Thank you, Mr Hoy. Mr Hoy will be aware that the content of members' contributions is not a matter for the Chair. There is, of course, a mechanism that all members will be well aware of at this stage in the session, whereby any inaccuracies or otherwise can be corrected. We will now move on. Well, actually, we will have a suspension briefly to allow those leaving the chamber in the public gallery to do so before we move to the next item of business, which is members' business in the name of Sarah Boyack.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please, subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.